All right. Welcome to DAO Talk. Today we have a very special DAO Talk interview with brileigh and Matthew from Juicebox. They are two of my absolute favorite content people, DAO people in the space. They have an amazing podcast called Juicecast, and they are, DAO content, Web3 content extraordinaires. So we are super excited. I'm super excited to talk with brileigh and Matthew. Welcome to DAO Talk. Well, we're going to talk about, we're going to cover tons of ground today, but I think it'd be helpful if we could just get started by learning a little bit more about your backgrounds and kind of how you got into working on what you're working on today.
Totally. I'll start. So I have a background in photography. Actually, both of us do. I studied photography, and then I worked as an assistant for an architectural photography studio, and then also co-directed a commercial gallery in Toronto. I then met Matthew about 2 years ago, and then that was sort of at the crossroads point for us of wanting to ditch the traditional art world in search of something better, and we were both curious about crypto and kind of dove headfirst into that.
Yeah. So, I mean, my story obviously dovetails with brileigh's because we met 2 years ago. But before that, I studied music. I was an orchestral musician, and then I studied photography after that. So I got a BFA and an MFA, and then I taught in an undergraduate photography program in Montreal at Concordia University. And and then I got kind of vaguely interested in crypto with the GME short squeeze and the Reddit degens and that whole fiasco. And then sort of got pulled in during the Dogecoin craze with Elon and SNL. So it's a pretty embarrassing origin story because it's super cringe and speculative bullshit. But because Dogecoin is stupid, but it is also kind of powerful. It's a top 10 coin how many years later, so it kind of shows you how strong the mimetic pull of something can be. But so after that, got into learning about DeFi and NFTs, and basically just got pulled into the Ethereum ecosystem in part because of I followed Nicholas on Twitter years ago. I knew him from another context, and his tweets were just always on my feed, and I just see this little tweet about Ethereum here and there, and it kind of go by, and I wouldn't really pay attention. And then sometimes I'd read a little more, and then I would just keep reading a bit more. And then, I got more involved. And then brileigh and I met and decided, fuck the art world and all of that we had to deal with. We were both, working super long hours and making shit money. And it just wasn't great. So decided to try and, we just kind of quit what we were doing and started doing this thing and started working for DAOs, and here we are.
I love it. I feel one of the best parts and most interesting parts of working in crypto is how unique everyone's origin story is. You just meet wild, very intelligent, but also very unusual in a good way. Usually, totally. people from every walk of life. So you're definitely not the first crew I've met that kind of went the art to crypto path. I love that you did it as a team too. Did you have a meeting where you were okay, it's time, fuck the art world, it's crypto time?
Well, I don't know. So when brileigh moved to Montreal for when we started living together, I was still teaching at the university, so I had a sort of stable gig doing that. It still paid terribly, but it was at least stable. So we kind of had that, and then brileigh, you can probably speak to it more than I can, but you basically went crazy from working on the architectural photography stuff, mostly the retouching, right?
Yeah. I was doing a lot of digital retouching, and I discovered that I really did not like that. It was just not something that brought me joy, and I didn't want to like look back on my life like 40 years from now and like regret all of the time that I had spent looking at like pixels like on a computer. And like we were both like interested about crypto, and we both like discussed that. And like I feel like at the time, like in a lot of our social circles, people either were like curious about crypto or they like absolutely hated it. And so the fact that we were both curious about it, we both wanted different work. I wanted a remote job. It just kind of like made sense. And so while Matthew started teaching and I moved here, I just started like getting involved. I was like reading CT, the crypto Twitter, like we had been listening to podcasts and like trying to understand as much as we could in the space. And given that we both had like a background in art, it made sense to find organizations already focused on art because we felt like that was where we could most easily contribute value. So I stumbled across an organization called Obscura, which is an NFT photography platform. And I started writing articles for them, interviewing artists, talking about the projects that they had going on. And through that, we discovered our first DAO, which was Raw DAO, which was a photography collecting DAO. And that is where we had like our first DAO experience, where we kind of learned like what it was like to be in a DAO. And we also got to take on like a lot of different roles. We started with marketing, running a podcast, writing articles, a newsletter, but then we also like explored a bit of community, did a bit of governance, did a bit of bookkeeping, did a little bit of like everything in that DAO just to kind of like figure out like what it is about a DAO that like holds it together and like what we like doing in the DAO. And then through Nicholas, we had learned about Juicebox and have been watching it on the sideline, and like we were really in awe with the way that Juicebox was working as like a DAO. And to us at the time, it felt like more of a like real DAO. Like people always love to talk about like what is a real DAO or a fake DAO, and like everyone has their own view on that. But it felt like it was really trying to build towards something that was more autonomous through like automating their governance, and like it felt like a DAO in the sense that there were so many different like voices and like opinions, and so we really wanted to get involved with that. And I guess that's where we are today still. So yeah.
I love it. So what are some of your takeaways from working in DAOs? Like you've seen multiple of them, you've held multiple roles, like yeah, I guess like maybe start like what's it like, right? Like even people who listen to this podcast who are all DAO obsessed, like, you know, not all of them have worked like directly in DAOs extensively. And I think also, you know, it can also just be like a little bit of a therapy session for people who have. But yeah, like what's it like? Like what's it like working in a DAO? And like what are some of your takeaways about you know, what's exciting about it and where we need to improve?
I mean, like day to day, it's kind of chaos. I mean, because everyone's remote and usually pretty distributed in terms of where they're from. Like Juicebox has contributors in the United States and Canada, but also in Australia, also in Asia, like lots of different corners of the world, South America. So I guess it's a little bit wild in the sense that you don't really have any management or like centralized authority. So you're coming into the DAO to propose work that you are kind of instigating. So you're kind of proposing your own role. So from the beginning, you're proposing what you will do. So, I mean, it's very self-directed. And so everyone is kind of working on their own little things. And then hopefully you're all aligned enough that it, you know, comes to a productive, you know, conclusion. I guess Juicebox is maybe a little bit more mature than some DAOs in the sense that there are sub DAOs within Juicebox. So we work closely with a team at Peel DAO, which is the team building the front end Juicebox.money for the Juicebox Protocol. So Juicebox DAO has a recurring payout to Peel DAO, which handles all the front end tasks. So it's a team of 5 engineers five or six people. So PM, UI, UX, and then 3 or 4 front end engineers. And so they're like a little unit within like the Juicebox ecosystem. And then there's, a group of contract engineers that are kind of working in their own little unit. They're not a DAO, but they're like working in kind of like a little cluster. And then there's people like us who are working on kind of like visibility and marketing stuff. And then there's folks that are working on governance automation. So we have 2 contributors who are working on a platform called Nance, which is a automation tooling for DAOs that's been developed in-house at Juicebox. So there's like all of these little clusters of folks working on different things. And then, we have weekly town halls and meetings as needed to kind of coordinate and figure out what to do. And then all of that is happening like out in the open in a public Discord, like even strategy, treasury decisions, like everything happens out in the open. There's no like DMs and like in private to make big decisions. So yeah, I don't know if that gives you like a good summary of what it's actually like to work Juicebox. The other thing that's unique about Juicebox is the governance. Like there's a recurring 2-week governance cycle. So every 2 weeks there's a temperature check process, and proposals will either make it through temp check or not, and then we'll go for voting the week following. So every 2 weeks there's a new governance cycle to vote on. So it's a pretty active DAO, I would say. It's one of the more active DAOs on Ethereum, like period, in terms of the number of proposals. Maybe less so like recently, but in 2022 it was, in 2021 it was like one of the most active. So yeah, I don't know if that if that gives a little summary. I don't know, Brileigh, if you have anything to add to your experience as a contributor, or
is the question like about like my like what has my experience been at Juicebox, or
I mean, you can take it any direction you want. I was kind of asking like what your takeaways are, right? From working in a DAO. Like you can focus on Juicebox specifically if you want, but just like your takeaways from working for DAOs or Juicebox specifically.
Okay.
What are things that like are unique about it? Like what's it like? And then, if you want to speak to areas where it's like uniquely great, and also areas where the experience could be improved.
Totally. Okay. Yeah. I feel like we've gone through like a I don't know if it's like a full circle moment, but I remember like when we first learned about DAOs, it was like the coolest thing ever. Like I was all about it. And I'm still all about it, but like I had a very utopic vision of what a DAO is and what DAOs unlock, and DAOs is the future of organizations. And I feel like over the last year, I've come to learn both the benefits of what DAOs unlock, but also a lot of the challenges that they face through the 3 DAOs that we had been involved in, but also making content about DAOs through DAOs. So I feel like there's like a lot of like coordination challenges. And as Matthew mentioned, like the general like chaos like in DAOs. And I feel like obviously there's like amazing things about it, like the fact that you can create your own job regardless of what you have on your resume, the fact that you can like discuss roles and the way that we assign like value to contributors transparently, and that there isn't like a singular boss. And like there's just so many like radical things that you have in DAOs that you don't have in traditional workplaces that really make you think about like what you don't have in traditional workplaces. And on the flip side, there's also like, I don't know how to put this, but like I feel like because there isn't like a singular boss, there is like a lot of chaos, and depending on like whether there's alignment or not, like that can really like affect like the growth of the DAO and like what that mission is, or like if they don't have a mission established, that can be really challenging in like a DAO context. And I think another thing, while I haven't obviously experienced this like firsthand, but like I think one thing that's like kind of sometimes concerning about like certain DAOs that we see is that like it could be like this almost this like libertarian like hellscape where like you have DAO founders and, you know, they have the ability to like leverage like the US dollar and like have this like bounty system for like compensation. And so people can come in from like other countries and they might be willing to work for like $100 or whatever, because that is worth a lot more in like the country that they're in because of the currency exchange. But like, I don't know if it's necessarily like a great thing about like what DAOs are unlocking or like, you know, what that could lead to in the future. And obviously this isn't something that's applicable to all DAOs, but I feel like there's like, as we've like been in the space and like seen how different DAOs work, I feel like not all of them have like the best intentions. And I think it's definitely made us think about both the utopic and the dystopic view of like what DAOs can be. So I realized that was like largely negative, but like there is a lot of things that I love about DAOs as well. So
I don't think it was largely negative. And I think like, yeah, anyone, you know, the audience for this podcast, like our community is all like people who are in the trenches. So I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh no, like none of those negative things resonate at all. I think we all like, you know, kind of recognize some of the challenges. It's really interesting. Like, I kind of want to like briefly touch on, like a few of the things that you mentioned, brileigh, and then maybe, turn it back over to you. So, one thing, like, I think that like, you know, there is like, if you observe, you know, I guess like, places in the world or economies where the standard of living and is the highest and human rights are respected the most, right? You sort of observe things like employment law and like when you observe those things, right, it's like, oh, actually they probably exist for a reason, right? And you know, these common pieces of societal infrastructure that exist in sort of the places where, you know, the human life is flourishing the most, right? It's not like sort of random, right? It's like an evolutionary process where as a society, we've kind of like figured out things that are actually better for the welfare of everyone. Like, you know, like, employment law and worker protections, and minimum wages and things like that. Right. And I think in crypto, it's kind of like, we kind of have to like figure out all those things from scratch. But even if we don't have to, it's just human nature. We like force ourselves to somehow, right? Like, somehow just like applying all the things that work well in like a different system and society, like isn't just automatic. Like we have to go through this like evolutionary process again, where there are a lot of painful mistakes made. And like, that is absolutely one area of DAOs that is just like, that just needs a lot of work, right? Like, is kind of like how to, create like, long-term productive, like working conditions, for everyone involved in the DAO. I think also, like you mentioned, you know, maybe in cases where there's like a founder or one person that has a lot of control, like what I've observed with DAOs is, in situations where like, we're sort of using the term DAO, right? Which stands for decentralized autonomous organization. So you're implying decentralization, but actually there isn't decentralization. You often get the worst of all worlds. Right? Like,
yeah,
you're right. You get like the worst of the decentralized parts and the worst of the not decentralized parts. So I want to actually talk about like what you think solutions could look like there. And I want to talk about that. And then I also want to talk about like maybe another challenge that you mentioned, which is around like alignment, right? So if there's no one boss or something, or maybe there's not like an explicit mission or like something that spells out what people should do, how do you sort of get people to coordinate in the most productive way? So those are kind of two areas of development or improvement for DAOs that you mentioned. And I'd love to like just explore those a little bit with both of you, like kind of the like, I don't know, labor protection or like human rights, individual rights, safety, like kind of like things for DAO contributors, and then also this idea of alignment, like strategic alignment in DAOs. Would love to talk about like, just we could explore the problem further, or just like talk about like what kinds of things it might take to improve, like what solutions might look like for those challenges.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting, like hearing you talk about this. It's like there's these two tensions between like too decentralized and like too centralized within like the DAO, because like DAOs are kind of like on a spectrum, like they can be one or the other, and so they each have their own issue. And I also feel like this is like also spoken largely from like a contributor perspective. Like I feel like someone that is like has delegation power maybe has a different view of like the way that DAOs are and if they're successful or not, versus someone that like depends on that as a contributor, like using that income for like depending on like their like cost of living. And so it definitely brings up a lot of questions about like having like basic income structures, or like the way that we can create like compensation structures and which ones are like effective or not. I'm not sure that I have an answer, like a solution for like how we can move forward from DAOs. I feel like there's something in between like both of those that is probably better. Like whether that's, I have to think about this one. Sorry.
I don't know. I personally, I just don't see like bounties being like a sustainable way of paying people. Personally, I know that they've been implemented like successfully in certain contexts, but like just the idea that people are gonna like pick up these little tasks and do them for like $100 like here and there, to me sounds like a total fucking nightmare. Like I truly can't imagine having to constantly like, try and find these little tasks and try and like cobble together like an income that way. Like I think if we're serious about people working for DAOs, one of the biggest challenges that we'll have to overcome is getting people to quit their like traditional workplace and come do this. And like I know a lot of us have made that jump, but it's like a really difficult jump to make. And on the other side of that, there have to be like, we have to have some way to employ DAO contributors that isn't so risky and scary and fraught with just general uncertainty. And I don't know, like I know there's like Opolis, which is trying to bring like health insurance and stuff for US contributors, like as a way to maybe create some benefits for DAO contributors. I know that we can also think of proposals as like contracts. That's another way to think about this. Like if your DAO is on chain and you set up a stream for your payout, and like that's like an on-chain contract, and that provides you some stability. Like I think there's like potential there. I don't know, just from our experience personally, because of the way that Juicebox payouts work, we're just always on like a 2 to 3 month kind of like question mark of, is our payout going to get renewed? And, and like, there's just always that kind of, that like, that tension hanging in the air of, having your income disappear entirely. So I don't know. I just feel like we need like a stronger like foundation, and more like we have transparency over payouts and how people are paid and who's being paid. But I think we also need like a bit more of like some frameworks in place and some, I don't want to say like contracts, because it's not exactly like contracts, but something that can give contributors more like stability and more confidence to contribute to DAOs. But yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want you to feel like I was putting you on the spot, Riley. Like,
no.
You named all the problems. Now name the solutions. Kind of like a ridiculous ask. So, I really appreciate though, like the insight that both of you shared. I think that's right. Like we're not going to attract ultimately, like, how successful DAOs are depends on how much talent is working for DAOs, and that's a competitive landscape, right? So if working for a DAO like has no way to like guarantee your future income, or I don't think we're going to attract the best people in the world to work for DAOs. So I think it's like it's a really important topic for all of us to be talking about. I think one thing that I sort of like an underlying challenge, I think, that's behind a lot of DAO problems is like just like a lack of business model, right? It's like at the end of the day, right? If there's not like a sustainable source of revenue coming in, then like the possibility to sort of even have that like guarantee of future compensation is like on shaky footing, right? To begin with. So you sort of don't even have the foundation to build upon in terms of like creating something like a contract, a longer term contract. So that's like one thing I would like that I've been thinking a lot about, and I would encourage like folks to think about is just like, thinking about the long-term and focusing on long-term sustainability. Maybe that's like a comment that I think is relevant to alignment. Also, like, this is something we're going through in Content Guild right now, where, like, I think a lot of times, if you have DAO contributors, right, maybe people say, oh, like, I could potentially like contribute by like doing various operational tasks, right? But like fundamentally, if there's not a strong like sustainable source of revenue for the DAO, I think like most other ideas for how to improve it are sort of like not that relevant, right? Right? Like if they sort of don't like directly move the needle on like the fastest path to financial sustainability, whatever that looks like. And that can be a business model. It can be some sort of like really solid, like retroactive public goods funding. It could be grants. It could be VC funding. Like there's a lot of different ways, right, to have like long-term funding. But, I think that's really has to be like the main focus in a lot of ways. And that's something I've been pushing really hard in Content Guild is like, for folks who like want to jump in and try to drive the DAO forward from a leadership perspective, which have a few of those folks in Content Guild. Like I personally have been really pushing towards like basically just focusing on diversifying the customer base, right? That's sort of like the only thing that the DAO funds in the short term, right? Because that's the path to the DAO then being able to do other things in the longer term. And I'm curious, like, what your experience, like, has been like there. Do you think that, like, I guess, like, what does sustainable funding look like in DAOs? Like, is there, do you see it as a problem, like, as something that, most DAOs face? Like, do you think there's, like, interesting solutions you're seeing out there in the space? What do you think it's going to take to get there for more DAOs to kind of have that sustainable funding mechanism going forward?
Yeah. I think you mentioned like a lot earlier. Like, I think some of the most successful business models right now is like either something where they provide like a certain service, like a protocol, and they generate like fees, and that helps like make the protocol run, like Juicebox. But there's also like crypto organizations that take in VC funding, or ones that are like, if they're more like a public goods, they can receive that or like go through the grants route. Though I find that like a little bit more like unsecured. Like I feel like public goods funding is like a bit harder to get. But yeah, I do feel like a lot of DAOs, especially because we had been in sort of like the DAO boom of like 2021, like a lot of DAOs like just kind of had a lot of money because there's just kind of like money throwing around like everywhere. And then I feel like that excitement didn't really allow for a lot of like care to happen into like, how do we preserve this money, whether that's like through treasury management and like diversification, or like generating like money through that treasury, or if it's through like figuring out like a business model, like, okay, we're making money now, but what about like in like a bear situation, which is what I think DAOs are struggling with right now, is like being able to generate revenue in the bear when like the markets are low, and like how do they overcome that through whatever their mission is, which obviously ranges depending on like what the organization is. I don't know, Matthew, if you have anything to add to that or ideas about like funding for like DAOs.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big problem. I mean, we're involved with RawDAO, and unfortunately, RawDAO no longer exists. And I think in part because it wasn't really even designed to. Yeah, it wasn't even a question of it like of the DAO discovering that it wasn't sustainable. It like wasn't even designed to be sustainable. It was just like from the start, it was not sustainable. So I mean, that was also a byproduct of when it was created, which was late 2021. So of course, sustainability was not like the number one concern. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's any like concrete solutions, but I mean, I definitely think that product teams have to be focusing on making products that people really need and will use. Like I do think that a lot of products in being built in crypto right now are very cool that they can be built, but they may or may not actually have like users that are like asking for this or are like, you know, ready to use this thing. Like it's cool that we can add, you know, ZK to XYZ, like a million different things. And that's great that we can do that. And yeah, we can do this on an L3 and we can do all these things, but like, okay, but like, are there people that are going to use it? Like, do we have users? Like, is this a thing that people want and need? So, I mean, that seems like the most obvious way for like product teams to be building things that are like strongly in demand and finding product market fit and not just building things because they're technically possible and really cool, which, you know, I get. And like, I'm on board with like thinking through these like crazy experiments and what's possible with the tech, but yeah, also trying to build things that are genuinely useful. Like for me, yes, we're building like crypto products and tools and all these things, but the next like wave of people who will come to these tools will not care that it's crypto. They just want this new thing to be unlocked for them. They just want to be able to do something that they couldn't do before. So if it's like ETH staking is like so obvious because they're getting like 1% interest on their savings in their bank or whatever. And yeah, you can get more than that in different contexts, but like I'm oversimplifying, but like just you can come, you know, get your like Rocket ETH or get your, you know, your Lido, like your staked ETH and like, you know, 4 or 5%, like it's like magic, you know? Under the hood, of course, this is like a crypto thing, but that's not important. Like people are going to come for that because they actually need it. And it's like an amazing unlock for them. So yeah, I think just focusing more on that side of things is an easier path to revenue.
On that note, I would love to hear your takes on Juicebox. So obviously like Juicebox is incredibly like cool technology. It's one solution to the funding problem that we described, like, you know, for creators or builders. But as you mentioned at the start of the podcast, it's also many different things, right? Like it's a protocol, it's a front end. I'm sure there's many different ideas and visions and builders in the DAO that want to take it in different directions. But I would love to hear your takes, like maybe from this perspective of like, okay, what's the vision for where Juicebox can really provide concrete value, you know, above and beyond the fact that it like happens to be on crypto rails, to, you know, to people. And what do you think that path, like kind of what's your opinion of what that path looks like, in terms of the product and also like how you get it out there in front of people, which I know is a big part of, you know, y'all's focus in the DAO.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for Juicebox is like what like Matthew and I like to talk about is like its anti-rug mechanism. Like a lot of the settings when you create a project, like they're all like smart contracts. And like, yeah, that's maybe not necessarily important to everyone, but the fact is that these are rules that are publicly accessible to everyone and they can't be changed. So like it's sort of like trust minimized and it like allows people to like state like what their intention is. And if they receive like more funding, then like a limit that they might set for a project, if they receive like a whole bunch of money on top of that goal, like they can't just like take all the money and run. Like they can only pull out like what they like set in the contract. So I feel like, you know, there's a lot of projects that receive like a lot of funding, and then like maybe there isn't like a promise of like a roadmap of like what's going to happen next, and then like people are like really disappointed because they contributed to a project and like nothing is coming out of it, and there's no communication happening between each other. And so I feel like Juicebox at least allows people to see like what they like, if they're contributing to a project, like what is going to happen to that, or like how much they can put in, like like the person that's managing it can only take out so much. And so it allows people to build trust. So like if the project continues to build, then they can like contribute more, and then like they can build a community around this treasury and like work together to like make it actually grow, regardless of if it's a fundraiser or if it's a DAO or if it's someone managing like a business on chain, or, you know, whatever it is. So I feel like that is like a huge thing for Juicebox that like I feel like isn't talked about like a lot, and I feel like is like a really powerful aspect of like the tool that like what it provides for people.
Yeah, I think what Brileigh just mentioned is huge. I just think of it as like a project launcher. So you're making a project, you make a Juicebox project. So part of what's hard to explain about Juicebox is that it's very flexible, so it can be used for a lot of different things. It's probably most known for fundraisers like Constitution DAO, like Moon DAO, but that's not the only thing that you can do with it. And like Brileigh said, you can, with on-chain rules, very clearly set limits and rules in place. So like this week we've seen random people sending ETH to, addresses for, maybe an airdrop or maybe nothing, like literally nothing. And, that's a particularly stupid example, but, with Juicebox, where the money can be withdrawn to or not. So where the funds are going, kind of how long these rules will be in place, when they can be changed, if they are changed, all these types of things. So it is actually, on chain. It is, actually a way to dictate with your community what kind of rules are in place. So I think that side of it is really important. And I also think that it's just broadly speaking like a capital formation like tool. Like it's a way to build a treasury, and that can be for any number of things. And yeah, you can do a lot of different things with the tokenomics. You can do ERC20s if you want. You don't have to do a token if you want. You can do NFTs. And with like the NFTs, you can do on-chain governance. Those NFTs could just be art, could just be plain and simple, just rewards. ERC20 tokens could be used for off-chain voting on something like Snapshot. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, in terms of like offering perks to supporters. But yeah, broadly speaking, for me, it's like, I feel like a way to launch a project is like the clearest way to articulate what Juicebox is. So it's kind of open-ended in the sense that those projects could be anything and everything. But yeah, it's your place to start a project on Ethereum. So yeah.
I think that's really powerful. I'm glad you brought up the send me ETH for question mark meta that is going on crypto Twitter right now.
God.
I think that is like such a good advertisement for the on-chain controls, anti-rug technology of Juicebox that both of you mentioned. It's like maybe that points to like the second part of my question, like how do we get we have this challenge with Tally all the time, right? It's like it's the value prop of governor is like similar, where it's like instead of like having a gnosis safe that you tell everyone is a DAO, like, but actually has a 3 of 5, controlling everything, actually like give the community guarantees, right? Similarly for you, it's like instead of like having people send you money and then being like, I'm going to make good project, with this, like you actually, have these on-chain mechanisms where the users are still in control, of their funds. Like, how do we communicate that, right? Like, how do we get these people that are just like, somehow have accrued this like massive following on crypto Twitter and YouTube, who are totally like not don't seem to be adopting like the sort of really valuable technology that we're building in this space, to improve even their like fundraising efforts, right? Like how can we sort of like get these powerful like programmable, smart contracts that really like allow for better project starting, for example, in people's hands? Like how do we convince people or make them aware that maybe they should demand that the CT influencer like set up a juice box instead of being like literally send money to my
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% clear on the how, but what I think the roadmap should be for something like Tally and something like Juicebox is to make it so that if someone doesn't make a Juicebox or someone doesn't have their DAO on chain, that it looks sketchy by comparison. Do you know what I mean? So that if someone does something like that, it's like, oh, that's not on chain. Like that's not really good. I mean, yeah, I guess you could argue that sending ETH to a random wallet is like on chain, sure, but it doesn't, it has nothing in place other than pure trust. So it's really like a question of trusting, random person like Ben or whoever the fuck. So yeah, I think trying to get to the point where, if a DAO doesn't have on-chain governance in place, that it's like people are very aware of that trust, that implicit trust that's taking place with that multi-sig, that 3 of 5 or whatever, or if they're doing a fundraise and you're just sending funds to some address, or you're sending funds to even a safe, your users are like community members are aware that there's an agreement there, there's a trust, there's something happening there that is very much a human like handshake deal. It's not set in stone. So yeah, I don't know. Getting to a place where this is like the default way of doing things, and everything else looks sketchy and risky by comparison, I think is the goal. I'm not 100% sure how to get there, but to me that's the playbook. Maybe I don't know, brileigh, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I feel like having that association without necessarily the need for communication is like the optimal like end case for both like on-chain DAOs or like on-chain treasuries. Is like, oh, like you don't have that, like, oh, that's kind of like red flag. Like I think being able to get to that point is like critical of like having people like associate that or having that as like the mental model. And I feel like that's what we're trying to do right now, is through like talking about like what Juicebox enables through mental models, or what Tally enables through like mental models, and like basically like what projects are like using that service, and like what that's unlocking for them that they didn't have before is like something that can inspire other people that have an organization or like have an idea of something that they want to start, and can be like, oh, well, they did it, like I can do that, or I can do something similar in their own way, and then like have this sort of like network.
I think that's right. Like when adoption has truly occurred, you don't like have to tell people, right? They just do it. And I think we've made some progress, right? If you look at the success of something like Gnosis Safe, I think that is an example of, I think at least in many corners of the Ethereum world, it's people would question, right? If you sort of like had a company's funds or something on Ethereum, totally. In someone's EOA, and no, not in a safe. So I think the path is going to get there. And also like, I think the natural market cycles drive this too. Like, a lot of the DAOs that make it from cycle to cycle, like that are going to make it into the next cycle from the last one, have on-chain governance, right, of some kind, right, or incorporate these controls, because like there's sort of a selection bias where kind of like the more thoughtful organizations are more likely to last, and that ends up like driving adoption. I think I wonder too, like even with these, like sometimes I wonder like is there like amongst like the influencers, right? Like there's always like the most responsible one, right? Or like the most forward thinking one, who's like really thoughtful about what they're doing. It's like, I always wonder if we should do some kind of like, like influencer marketing somehow for Tally, where it's like you have someone who has that reach, like the degens are really the ones who like make the wheels turn in crypto, right? Like that's how we all first got into the space. It's like if you could kind of partner with folks who like really have the ear of the degens and be like, hey, by the way, like we all like to like do random shit on chain, even if it's really dumb, but here's what you should look for, right? Or like, here's my project that I'm launching that like incorporates, all of the current best practices. That's something that I think about at Tally. It's kind of like, how do you cross the chasm, right? Even into like not even like mainstream, like internet users, just mainstream. Like the reality is that mainstream crypto is like degenerates, right? Like it's like, that's like, the most widespread use case at this point is speculation. And it's kind of like, how do we get governor DAOs into that, like, where people frame it in terms of like, hey, this should be on your like investment criteria list, or like you should be expecting this, like when you're considering putting funds into something, is kind of that it has these on-chain controls.
We just need to bribe Ben.eth to start marketing our anti-rug protocols. Yeah.
Get BitBoy in there.
Yeah, get BitBoy in there too. I mean, the thing that was crazy about for me about the BitBoy saga was that I don't know if you saw this, like whatever, a day ago or 2 days ago, he then announced that he's gonna release his own DEX. And it was like, BitBoy, like fucking 3 days earlier, you showed the world that you don't know how to use Uniswap, and then now you're going to release a DEX?
Yeah,
crazy.
BitBoy definitely can't be saved, but like what I'm thinking is like, how do you find like the smarter, more responsible like leader, and then help them beat BitBoy? You know what I'm saying? Like, because like it's like the problem is that somehow BitBoy is winning. It's like, what the fuck, like as an ecosystem, we need to figure out how to build up people who are like just not the scum of the earth.
Anything but BitBoy, honestly.
Anyway, there are many examples of great people who do things the right way in the space. I just want them to be more famous than BitBoy. One day we will get there.
A noble goal.
Yeah, it's funny, even like the example I always use for a DAO that's like actually on chain, right, is the Arbitrum DAO. But it's so funny, like, to watch the process of education play out, because like no one actually knows that. Like, I know that because I like was involved in launching the Arbitrum DAO and like, have reviewed the documentation in detail and like understand how Governor works. The only thing people know about Arbitrum DAO is like they fucked up communicating the foundation launch during the airdrop. So like if you were to poll people like, is the Arbitrum DAO decentralized, you'd probably get 90% no, 10% yes, which like, don't get me wrong, they fucked up communicating the foundation during the airdrop, but like the reality is the Arbitrum DAO is like by far the most decentralized DAO. Like in Ethereum. So it's like, that's just like a really interesting example of that like process of evolution and communication kind of like playing out over time. It's so much more messy than it would ideally be. Anyway, okay, well, normally I like to ask your favorite and least favorite thing about working in the space, but I think we kind of covered that with DAOs earlier. So I'm going to skip to our final closing question. We've been deep in the weeds, deep in that on-chain weeds. We're going to exit the weeds, we're going to change. It's time for a vibe shift. I felt
Go to an oasis.
Did you feel that? The question is, what is your favorite place in the world and why? And I mean, y'all can answer separately, or if you have the same favorite place, just
it's
elaborate.
the same.
Okay. Yeah. But I need to hear from both of you, like, on why it's so great.
Yeah. Yeah, Japan is definitely our favorite place. We recently went there for ETH Global, and then we somehow ended up staying in Japan for like 3 weeks. It was like the longest trip I had ever been on, and both the first time, like for each of us, that we had ever left like North America. So it was like a pretty big trip for us in terms of like the experience that we gained from it. And I feel like for me, like it affirmed like a lot of things that I feel about America, like in terms of like the way a city needs to be designed for like density. Like their transit system is amazing. The like city is so clean, like everywhere. Like I see people like, okay, I don't think everyone needs to do this, but I saw people like vacuuming like the subway platform, like, and it was like outdoors, like it was insane. I mean, I think that's maybe like too far on the spectrum, but I feel like there's a lot of things about like the city's like well-being and like the fact that there are so many people, and like I maybe saw like 5 homeless people like during my whole stay there, versus like if you go to New York City, if you go to like other major cities in like North America, you'll see like tons of displaced people. And like I have a like strong like root with like urban issues. Like that is sort of like where my like photography background comes from. So like these were like a lot of things that I had seen in Japan that were like totally different, and knowing that they had that like density was like, oh, like we can build cities in like a different way. And like that was like a huge thing for me, was just like how like efficient it was, but also like how beautiful it was. Like, I mean, maybe Matthew can also talk about that. Like, I don't want to ramble forever about Japan since we should both share, but
yeah, I don't know. Well, we live in Montreal, and I don't know if you've ever been to Montreal, but Montreal is basically like a big construction zone. So there's a very prominent mob here that runs a racket on the construction industry. And I know it sounds like a, you know, Marty Scorsese like script or whatever, but it's actually true. And so they'll just like rip up roads like for no reason, and it's just always chaos here. And there's just construction pylons everywhere, and it's just a fucking mess. And there's just like debris everywhere and like garbage. And I mean, there's like nice parts of the city too, but it was just shocking. We went to Japan and it was just like everything was pristine. We were in Osaka and Kyoto and Tokyo, and I mean, it was just so clean, and people took civic responsibility so seriously. Like there's no garbage cans in public, so you take your garbage home, because it's like an affront to society if you throw your garbage like on the street or whatever. Like it is so disrespectful. Whereas here it's like, I don't know, there's like a bed, and there's like just all this shit everywhere. So I don't know. It was just like really jarring to come back. Yeah, so that was probably the biggest thing. But I think just going to Tokyo with like I think 9 million people in the city of Tokyo, and just thinking, there's that David Graeber quote. It's like the hidden, I'm paraphrasing, but like the hidden truth of the world is that it's something that we make, and we could just as easily make it differently. So it's like whenever you go to a new place, you just realize like, oh, everything could be different. Like not just this one little thing or this little thing. It's like, no, like we decide how to make the world, like, and all of the other people who made these decisions were just like you. They weren't different than you. They were the same as you. So that's kind of my ethos for crypto as well. It's like, yeah, like we are deciding how the world works. Like if you want to change something, like get to work, like start making changes, like build it in the image of what you want to see, you know? So that's kind of like why we're here. And yeah, that's also why I think travel is interesting. So yeah, that was like a brief summation of our time in Japan and being disgusted at garbage on our return. So yeah.
We got a camera as well, and we bought it in Japan, like using like DeepL to like translate it. And then we couldn't fit everything, so we like folded up like the boxes and sent them back by like boat. And we actually got them yesterday in the mail, which was really amazing.
Why did you have to bring that up?
Okay, we can cut this, but like we had these like
So stupid.
We had these like inserts that like keep the like camera secure. So like if you ever want to like sell like a camera, or like when you sell like a computer, like everyone's like, oh, does it come with a box? Like it's so stupid because no one ever like uses a fucking box, but like everyone wants the box. So like we wanted to keep the box for like the really expensive camera that we got. So but we couldn't fit it in the luggage, so we had to like mail this box back, and like because it's like this solid like cardboard insert, like you can't like fold it, so we like had to like shove it like in this other box and like put all this other stuff in it. So
this is all getting cut.
Sorry.
It's really funny that you brought that up, because I was about to bring up, like, I could tell that you were in Japan and also that you all have an art background, because I was treated to stunning pictures of Japan on a daily basis. And then, you know, you came back and I was like, dang, I don't see quite as much like, you know, architecturally pleasing with beautiful scenic backdrop photos to start my day anymore. But yeah, it's crazy. Like even like some of the pics that y'all were posting on Twitter, like it's crazy how every single detail is so much more organized. Like just looking at like, yeah, the streets or like people's backyards or like whatever. It's like the lines of everything are way cleaner because there's like nothing out of place. Like everything is like perfectly symmetrical and like there's nothing random out of place anywhere. But not in like a like, you know how you go to some people's houses and they're like too clean and it's kind of like creepy, like there's no life in them, you know?
Yeah,
it's like
cold.
Plastic on the couch.
yeah, exactly. It's not like that. It's like you could tell how much everyone cared. Like it's like a soulful like perfection where everyone's like doing it, you know, with that level of care, because that's their sort of like aesthetic. Yeah, it looked really cool. It made me want to like. A lot of people maybe want to go to Japan when Crypto Twitter was in Japan, but like y'all's picks, I was like, okay, yeah, we gotta go.
Yeah, Matthew's got some bangers on the Fuji. Stay tuned at some point for some kind of collection of banger Japan photos.
Need that.
HD banger.
Need that.
Japan photos.
Yeah, shot in 8K or whatever. So, yeah. I guess no, the Fuji would be 11K, so they'll be coming at you in 11K.
Wow. Can't wait. Cool. Well, brileigh and Matthew, thank you so much for coming on DAO Talk, telling us all about real stories from the DAO trenches, about why Juicebox is such an amazing product and how you can launch your project with anti-rug technology using Juicebox.
Yeah.
Don't send your money to random people's crypto wallets.
Yeah,
please demand that they set up a Juicebox instead. Yeah, telling us all about Japan. So great to see you, and we'll see you around.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having us. It was really fun to connect. And yeah, also stay tuned for the upcoming Juicecast episode with frisson and Tommy. It's going to be a banger.
Hell yeah. We did a little home at home. So yeah, crossover episodes.